Greetings, everybody. Scott Stevens here as we look at Scott's weather. We're kind of just adjusting to some things because we've had clouds the last couple of days. The sun is there, and because this is the last week before we lose daylight savings time, that sun I got coming in this window will be gone or low enough that it's not an issue in the coming weeks. With that change of daylight savings time, even though we changed the schedule of it, made the daylight savings time season longer, extending from the 1st of April now into a beginning, I believe, the second weekend of March. And then it ends what used to be like middle of October. Now it's the first weekend of November because essentially that first weekend of November begins 1 November as early as it can be this year, 1 November specifically. We have one of our longest periods of standard time that we can possibly have. With those longer nights, in some locations comes a better shot to view the aurora. The situation going on right now in Norway, because the geomagnetic situation is just conducive to that. We're at a solar minimum. We're going to be there for decades to come. So it's my assumption, because the two are correlated, that the magnetic field responds to what happens with the sun, that for a time being, through much of this winter and for years to come, we're going to see just brilliant displays of aurora. This is what's happening. This was Norway last night. Some weather moved in as the night moved on. And so it may be a couple of days before we see another round. As we look at kind of the fire, that has been the headline out west where I am. We had one, thank goodness it was a small fire, and it was before a lot of the big fires erupted, so there was plenty of manpower almost immediately available to suppress the one in my neighborhood. But as we look along the longer time frame, when records began, or like when the Forest Service began and then took up the mantle of dealing with fires, the 30s, big drought years, also laden with extreme weather, extreme cold and extreme heat, both happened in the 30s. But as we look and look at what happened before we had airdrops, before we had hot shots, before we had all the assets that the Forest Service does right now, BLM in that grouping as well, and the money to go after. The other thing was, we weren't built into the woods like we are now. And so there's a great incentive, monetary incentive, to put out the fires. So we can see they're just not quite as grandiose as they have been in years past. As we move on, between October 20 and October 26, the United States set 3,434 new daily record low temperatures versus 517 on the other side, the heat that came in ahead of this cold. And in that, there were 234 new monthly low record temperatures, and then as well as 114 all-time record lows for being the coldest temperature for a specific month. A lot of cold with this last surge that came southbound over the last 7 days or so. All right, from NASA, our OSIRIS-REx spacecraft sample and rocks from the asteroid Bennu is safe for return to Earth. The mission team from NASA Goddard and University of Arizona, plus got to have a contractor in there, Lockheed Martin, worked around the clock to stow the sample. They actually sent a rocket out, satellite attached, intercepted the asteroid, gently touched down, did a sample, retrieve, a couple of scoops, and now they blast off, gently leaving that asteroid, and will return that sample to Earth, much like what the astronauts did with their lunar sample returns in the late 60s and 70s. All right, so now New York Times article, they're beginning to introduce, we've talked about disclosure a couple times on Another Perspective, the plan to play with the weather, not behind the scenes, not using secret technology, not using just the military, but out in the open, plain as day. We need to play with the weather. Why? Climate crisis. We have to do this. So the question is, can we take a chaotic, nonlinear climate system and deliberately perturb it on a scale, large enough scale, with the assumption that we can make skillful modeling based forecasts on this regional weather impact that we would like to now admittedly have? And this is why I've done so many shows about what's going on behind the scenes and disclosures, because the powers that be are getting ready to bring these processes front and center for your tact approval, acceptance, and so we don't have to hide them. in what were conspiracy theories in the past, but it's just now operational procedure. There's a process and a reason why I've done the shows the way I've done these past shows. All right, South Dakota, kind of going back to the previous topic. If I could sort these tweets, I gladly would. But South Dakota also broke its record lowest temperature ever recorded in the month of October with 21 below zero at Hill City back on the 27th. That was 2 mornings ago, surpassing by 2 degrees Fahrenheit the old record set at Kennebec, set 95 years ago. So we're seeing, at that point in time, we were coming out of a rather cold period from a previous solar minimum. We've had 90, 100 plus years of very mild weather, and now we're returning to that is what, if you look at a 20-year temperature, 20,000 year temperature trend, it is now decidedly downward, and we will see more and more of those all-time, either monthly or probably before the year is over, annual record low temperatures. Eric Blake, really good agreement for the traditional dry season, fall, to begin next week in South Florida. Look at these dew points, and that's an indication of the drier dew points coming on in. Might even see Miami's first temperature under 70 degrees since the 8th of May. And these are dew points in just the 20s. And if you have been in the muggy weather for months, a nice fresh breeze of cool air from the north is absolutely welcome. All right, as we look at Aurora Forecast, we did this yesterday. It's a space-based NOAA forecast, and they can see in the upper atmosphere, the far upper atmosphere, where we see an excitation in the atmosphere. So we're back over Scandinavia, Iceland, Greenland, and then around the Hudson Bay area. The southern hemisphere is just as active, and it is always bulging to where we see the midnight hour. That midnight hour, where are we? We're right at about midnight, coming up on UTC or London in Central Europe, and then down through the mid part of Africa. And as we get to that midnight hour is when that biggest activity in the ionosphere is excited. So that's something, as we move through winter, we'll see more and more of those across the northern states. Also, we get the sun open up, a coronal hole throws all of those excited molecules our direction. That energy then will see those at farther and farther southern latitudes. All right, temperatures drop and the days become shorter. Wildland fire activity has started to decrease. No new large fires were reported today, and we did see one contained in California. That's the good news on that front. Still some smoke, though, as we get south of Mono Lake, and that leaves some haze and some particulate matter through the Central Valley, especially the central southern part of that agricultural valley in California. Look at all this smoke, all this snow now on the ground from Laramie, Cheyenne, back up to Rock Springs, through the Colorado Rockies, and then out over the panhandle of Texas, where they saw snow and rain the day before. And then finally that storm got a nice big boot and then raced on out towards the north and east. But as I went to bed last night, say 1 a.m. local time out there, it was still a mixture of rain and sleet. And this snow field will survive the day. So it'll be hard and crusty as they wake up tomorrow. All right, it's Thursday, so we get the release from the Drought Center, and this is where we have seen an increase or decrease. And I'm not looking at the current map, but the change over the past month. As we compare the 29th of September to 4 weeks later, the 27th of October. The green areas where we have seen some improvement, the second of the deeper shade of green at Holton and up towards Caribou, Maine, where we have seen 2-category improvement. Also in and around the Flathead Valley in northern Montana through Kalispell area, and then a few others, a few other river basins. But otherwise, if you compare those places that have seen degradation, denoted in yellows and the oranges versus the green, by far and away, we have seen a degradation of the drought situation. What is not included is a large part of this last storm, which fell between Tuesday morning yesterday and then a little part of today. So that will be included in next week's map. As we look out the next 10 days, the European model, look at all the brown and red. Those are locations forecast by this model to see less than usual, less than normal precip with the bullseye centered over eastern Texas, a little stripe of above normal precip in the northwest and the Pacific Northwest, and then through the middle Atlantic, the Delmarva Peninsula, and then southern New England, and then also a little sliver in southern Georgia. Those are the areas where we could see or modeled to see above normal precip. Otherwise, the remainder 80% of the nation at or less than normal precip. Record highs today, or at least approaching those in the southeast. Tomorrow, far fewer. It looks like just in around Tahoe area at or above 66 degrees, which would leave them close to a record high or tying the record high set back in 1915. And then a little bit of warmth out west on Monday, but that will be counterbalanced by a lot of cool air just before election. So much of the eastern states and the middle Atlantic will be at or cooler than normal as we move through election day. Avon Park, Florida at 93 to be the warmest. On the one extreme yesterday, 2 degrees. Plus 2 degrees. That's a lot better than 29 below 2 days ago. This north of Saratoga, Wyoming. And Zeta, there she is. Look at this acceleration movement east-northeast at 48 knots, or in civilian speak, 55 miles per hour. And then there's this guy. Just because, we're winding down October and thinking November we're going to be free and clear of the tropics, that doesn't appear to be so. This disturbed area, they're anticipating a medium risk of formation inside the next 5 days, the next 120 hours, at about 60%. The latest GFS model we'll look at shortly winds this puppy up as a hurricane to be dealt with, and we'll show you its eventual, let's just say its forecast path. It's a long way away. All right, a little closer look. There's that snowfield across Texas. And then the acceleration of this Zeta moving very quickly off to the north and east. And it's curious, and I'll denote where the front is. Out here, it's still warm, still humid, but right along the frontal boundary, right here, notice how these north winds, and there was even a couple of set of billows being those clouds. I'll see if I can stop this right here, and then escalate through, come on through. Billows being where we see this right here through southern Illinois, where we see the rippled, almost look like train tracks. Those clouds just show up out of nowhere, and it looks like it's beginning to give a little nudge, a little shove to some maybe the 12 to 18,000 foot layer of the atmosphere. You'll see those show up, and then they're gone. And what I've noticed is that these trails, these contrails, these chemtrails really like to denote the frequency. They'll fly right in through there, and then they'll outline the boundaries, the frequency between the ripples, and then also the boundaries. That's something we can all use our phones as time-lapse cameras. There's apps for that, left and right, free apps for that. So it's something, if you want to, set up your phone, put up a little tripod. You got one of those days where those planes are just flying through the sky, and set up the time-lapse and notice where the planes intersect and what's happening. It's truly a revealing experience. All right, temperatures cool through the western lakes, eastern Dakota still just in the 30s. It's been cold enough that the guys in that drought story that they published out of University of Nebraska today, that the soils are frozen. So we kind of need to get a little thaw and begin to pull the moisture in, because it's been such a dry summer. Montana's warmed up nicely. So has a good chunk of Canada, because of the Chinook conditions that kicked in. We've really had a struggle getting data out of Canada today. They've been shut down for some reason. Let's see if we can refresh this. Nope, it's still down. So we're not getting comms across the border. Here's the radar. The snow showing up Fargo, Grand Forks, those locations. Just now it looks like it's probably leaving Bismarck, and then the northeastern states. But the southern end of this is where Zeta has been. This is where the water's been. But this was the second area featured by the drought. So these rains are very, very welcome. All right, head under the forecast. We'll start with the jet stream up at about 18,000 feet. This is the 500 millibar level. And what we do, the yellow and reds are areas of vorticity. Vorticity is where the jet stream makes, curves. And where that curve is its greatest, just think about rubbing your hands together. What happens when you rub the hand together? You create heat. That friction, same thing, not so much the heat, but what it does is it creates vortices inside the atmosphere, and those vortices spin. Show me a time lapse of a thunderstorm that isn't spinning. of what we looked at in the satellite imagery, where that spinning is where you're going to get an electrical attraction to the water molecule, and boom, up it goes. So the spinning is where we see these brightest reds and purples. And it's this vorticity, the top part of that number, the VORT, 35, that's just where it's the most intense. And out ahead of that field, we get the greatest advection or movement of vorticity into a region, is where the atmosphere is like ahead of a snowplow, just lifted up and then thrown skyward. And that's where, as you learn in med school, where you forecast the rain. Those are the locations you forecast the snow. So these are key maps for meteorologists assessing how to formulate a forecast. So this next wave already coming in, and we can see out ahead of it. I'll come over here to the radar, and it really hasn't shown up in Seattle area yet. It just isn't there. If we come here, I'm going to change regional sectors. We'll come on out, and we'll see that here's the, I got to wait for that whole thing to load. Here's the next inbound storm right there. And we come back to the forecast. It's this ripple. So right ahead of this ripple exists this massive cloud shield. So there's always some kind of a correlation between these maps and what we see in the real world. So this is the next storm that the bulk of at least the northern tier of the states will be dealing with. And it intensifies. We begin to see part of the jet stream circling off, closing off, and that denotes a fairly mature event. But as it arrives, this is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday that it comes on through. So it introduces a nice slug of very cool air. Here's the snow. It really hits the Cascades and then through the northern Rockies, and then just bang, runs out of steam, runs out of moisture. Most of that water is wrung out on the coastal ranges and then the Cascades. And then by the time it gets into central Idaho, there's just a few flurries and then it's gone. But still, it's a nice event when you get to northern Canada, or at least the middle portion of the Canadian prairie provinces. There's snow. This is a very healthy snowfield. But also ahead of us, remember that dry air we were talking about in Florida? There's no moisture for this puppy, this very energetic storm, to work with. So it has to just do it with sheer strength. And usually with those kind of events, you end up with a lot of dry snow and wind. Not so much those wet, cakey snows that we just saw in Oklahoma and Texas. It's a very, very dry, fast-moving snowy event. So that's what will likely happen to New England and the Mid-Atlantic states as we get to the day before election. And then by election day, we're just simply in the cool air behind it, or the cold air behind it. Now, back to the jet stream. Let's come through here. This storm, I wish I could so stand in front of this. This storm is gone, and now we've got a big ridge arcing over the nation. That means that we'll see a very nice temperature recovery. Beautiful, beautiful week next week for Indian summer-like weather. A great week for the farmers to get the fields dry, to get in there and harvest what they haven't been able to. Because what seems to be coming is a much wetter storm as we get through the end of next week. Here's that little storm that the National Hurricane Center highlighted at the top of the show. This baby comes together and then wanders into the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. So let's see how that develops. So there's the storm. It's gone for election day. There's our beautiful Indian summer-like weather, almost from coast to coast, from California to Connecticut. It looks good the week following election. And then we've got another storm. This one much, much wetter for the end of next week, in about a week and a few days. It also delivers a whole lot of snow to the middle part of Canada. But here is our next tropical storm, our next hurricane. Eta, ETA, I believe, will be the next Greek alphabet name in line. It passes the western tip of Cuba and then re-intensifies, and it looks like it's at some point of the west coast of Florida. But granted, this is 312 hours out in the future. There's a long way to go. And in fact, if this storm is a little farther south, then it'll get drawn up and sheared, meaning sheared. It won't have this nice rotating central column. It'll get tipped over. It won't be able to maintain its identity as a tropical storm or hurricane. It'll be just stripped out and a nice healthy mass of thunderstorms before it gets pulled in. So we'll see how that develops. But ultimately, what I see happening is Precip for the Western Mountains, where we still have fire risk. Out over the next 10 days, we're going to put another layer or two of snow on these higher elevations at or above 5,000, 6,000 feet, maybe higher, certainly higher elevations in Colorado and southern Utah. But as we get into Idaho, get into Montana, and certainly into British Columbia, look at the max down here on the bottom of the screen, 155.4. That's 12 feet of snow. Almost 13 feet worth of snow. 156 is 13 feet. So that's a lot of snow. And undoubtedly, that's going to be focused in some of these coastal ranges of British Columbia. And the jet stream, we're still waiting for the European model to come on in, but that's probably the highlight is that baby right there. Let's go and get out of U.S. regions. Let's come over here, look at global and continental. Let's look at North America and out over the full 10-day period. See, we're starting to Yellowknife up in the Northwest Territories, the Yukon. They don't get above 10 degrees Fahrenheit or above about, what would that be? Not minus 18, about minus 14, 15 Celsius. That's going to be their high temperature. So the cold is settled in. So we just need to get that snowfield established, and then Canada will be open for business to continue to drop these Arctic boundaries south. All right, guys, they look like sine waves. Look at all these comments. I wish I knew your names. Turn up the chainsaw. I'm ready too, says Robin. Yeah, we got some firewood delivered last night, and I am so grateful for that to be here. Keep turning, keep teaching, weatherman. It's just what I'm born to do. They look like they're sine waves or sound. They do, those ripples. And you can see the contrails. You can see the contrails end up in this kind of a fashion, or even this way. They'll end up smearing from side to side to side. And at the maximum point of a turn, boom, where they start to turn back, there'll be another plane. They'll come right across it. It's fascinating to see where these trails intersect one another. Rarely is there nothing happening at that chosen point. So who's flying the planes? Who's adjusting their speeds, their throttling, their vectoring exactly? There's passengers aboard, but you can, if you're flying, you can feel the plane just do that little shift back and forth. And the pilots are going like, it's just a necessary evil. This is what we have to do to keep our jobs. All right, the sun. Let's see with that. Does the fluctuation in the magnetic field have a direct impact on these weather waves that look like resonant patterns? I think the magnetic field is there. I don't want to say it's steady state, but I don't believe it is naturally occurring at those frequencies. There has to be some other kymatics, some of the resonance pattern superimposed upon that which naturally exists. And that's probably the way I can explain it in the fewest amount of words. And then therefore the sun, as in a grand solar minimum, impacting the magnetics and thus our weather patterns. And if man is forced to or asked to or has to release its impact on the weather, this has been one of my enduring questions. What happens to Earth's climate? What happens to the weather? How does it go from being free? It's like a caged dog, a caged elephant. What will it do once it finally gets let out of the cage that it has been in for so many decades? And that is something that I trust I will see in my lifetime. And I'm really excited to share that with you. All right, guys, that'll be it for the day. We've got a Friday coming up, and we'll track this new developing storm. Zeta, I believe, is the name. I'm just not as familiar with my Greek alphabet as I should be. There was a time 30 years ago where I was, but it's just not there right now. And then see where Zeta's gone. But otherwise, we really have a fairly tranquil 7 days coming up weather-wise. And if we can get some rain as this model looks like it's going to happen into California, that would really be just a beautiful thing. Let's do Precip Totals. Let's do it in inches for the whole of North America. And it's kind of odd because the scales on temperatures or precip is just a little bizarre on this map. You'd think we'd stay in the blues rather than going into reds and then cycling back into cool colors once we cross that 10-inch barrier. So it's a very curious color palette that Weather Bell has chosen. But as we zoom in, we've got a lot of water coming into the west coast of Canada, and then finally some good precip even down to San Diego and points south. And that would be exceedingly welcome for residents in those locations, but still dry in what they used to call the Great American Desert from North Dakota all the way down into central and western Texas. That was the American desert as the pioneers pushed their way westward in the middle 1800s, the Great American Desert. And they were coming out of a grand solar minimum at that point in time through the late 1600s and through almost the entirety of the 1700s. And so as Lewis and Clark moved west and moved into this frontier, it was dry. And I can't tell you how many dry land farmers, because we didn't have center pivot irrigation, we didn't have pump irrigation. They either flood irrigated their newly broken in lands and trusted that the streams would continue to deliver water to them, or it was dry land. They trusted that the rain would be enough. And how many farmers went out of business from 1880 to 1910 in Wyoming, in Montana, in Western North Dakota, in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, because they had all this free land, 640 acres, 320 acres from the government that they could homestead. How many of those just didn't make it because they couldn't pump water? It was just too fantastic an invention at that point in time. All right, guys, the climate's changing. It's kind of an exciting time to be alive with record cold across the nation and across the continent, indeed. And more's coming. More's coming. All right, catch you tomorrow as we wind up the week. In the meantime, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the warmth, enjoy the change of seasons, and keep looking up.